Welcome to this video covering further techniques for working with InDesign. In this tutorial, we're going to cover 10 different techniques. How to make your publication look like an open magazine with highlight and shadow effect, placing an image as a spread, placing an image as a background, changing opacity on a background image, adding color behind an opaque background image, using layers to organize information in your publication, creating a photo grid, adding frames to images, creating object styles, and placing one image in several separate frames to create an interesting collage effect. So let's get started. I need to begin by opening my Pages panel. Remember that to add a master page, which is where we begin with this step, we need to double-click on a master. This takes me to my master page. Because we want to apply it to our whole magazine, we need to be sure to put it on a master page. But first, because this is something that we might want to turn on and off, I'm actually going to make it a layer. The Layers panel should be in the same window as when you open the Pages panel. However, if you don't see it, just go up to Window and then Layers, and it'll bring you right to that panel. I'm going to double click on the Layer 1 text and name this layer Highlight and Shadow Effect, and then click OK. Now that I have this in place, I am going to begin by choosing the rectangle tool. And then we're going to draw a rectangle that covers the inner area of the right page. And it should extend maybe about a ½ inch to an inch past that left margin line. And then release your mouse. The next thing that we want to do is apply a gradient to the interior. But first we need to make sure that we're applying it to the fill and not the stroke. So just to make sure that that's where it's being applied, double click on the fill and then click cancel. Now we're going to apply our gradient. Go up to Window, Color, Gradient. In the gradient panel, we're going to choose Linear from the drop-down Type menu. Now notice that I have a gradient in place, but I have an effect that's applied to this particular rectangle that I want to get rid of. So make sure that you don't have any effects in place that might not be relevant to this particular technique. I'm going to choose my rectangle. I'm going to choose the Effects option at the top of the screen, and I can see that I have a drop shadow in place. So I'm going to click on that and then click out of the box to deselect drop shadow. Notice now that I have my rectangle in place. We want the black to be along the edge in about this position. We want the diamond to be in about this position in the center. And then we want the white to be in about this position along the slider. We need to make sure that it goes from black to white, from left to right. So that's a good way to remember that. Black to white, left to right. It's still looking a little bit too bold and stark to look like it's the effect that we want to achieve. In this case, we need to do one more step, and that is to go up to the FX icon in the options bar and change the transparency. we're going to reduce the transparency, which in this case is reducing the opacity. And generally about a 40 to 50% transparency is a good value for this effect. You don't want to go too much higher than 50 because it might start to drown out the images and the text that you put on the pages for content. And then click OK. Now you'll notice that it looks like there's some dimension, like the page is curled up a bit with this gradient in place, and that the magazine is open on a flat surface. The last step is to add some contrast to the left page of the master. We need to choose the rectangle tool and draw a similar shape of rectangle on the left inner page. Then we're going to choose a fill. So double click the fill box in the options bar at the top of the screen. And we're going to choose white. Again, I have this drop shadow that's being applied, so I'm going to go to my effects panel and get rid of this drop shadow. However, this opens our panel to where we need it to be next. So I'm just going to do this as if you don't have something that you need to get rid of. Go up to the effects panel and then choose inner glow. You can change the opacity, but for now, I think this is a pretty good setting. Then you can click out, and notice now that it's lighter towards the inside of the page, and this helps to keep that effect that there's dimension to the pages when opened. This is a good technique for presenting your work in a professional way when you are sending it digitally. So if someone's going to be looking at it as a PDF and not as a physical copy, this helps to add the dimension that will sell your work as a publication. For technique number 2, we're going to work on placing an image as a spread. To do this, I'm just going to navigate to one of the spreads in my document. So I'm going to go down to pages 4 and 5. If I double click on one of those pages, it'll bring me right to that spread. Next, I'm going to choose a photo that I want to place as an entire spread. This means that it's going to span over both pages. I'm going to go to File and then Place. And then I'm going to choose the picture that I have selected for this spread. In order to place it as a spread, I need to click, hold, and drag an object frame all the way across both pages so that it will fill this frame. In this case, notice that when I drag it, I'm going to need to do some resizing, but I'll do that once it's been placed. When I let go, I can see that my image is now covering the whole page, but it's not covering it exactly the way that I want it to, so I need to still do some other adjustments. One thing that I can do is go up to the options toolbar with the selection tool active and with my frame selected, and click this box that's labeled Auto Fit. Next, I can then drag the anchor box on the center right side to make sure that everything is in place and filling the page. Next, I can also use these commands, fill frame proportionally. This makes it so that the image is now spread out into the frame in the way that I want it to, covering both pages. If I want to change the display mode, remember, go up to Object and then down to Display Performance. And I want to see this as a high quality display, so I'm going to choose that one. Now I can see it as the display that it will be. This would be if you want an image as a background, and then say you want to use some other shapes, such as a rectangle, to add other pictures into, or to add text frames where you're going to add panels and want to have this image spread as a point of interest on the page. One such way that we can work with images in a spread is to make sure that they're placed properly on the page. What we mean by this is if we choose the selection tool and highlight the frame, notice that we want the focal point, which in this case is the dress on the mannequin, on the page so that the crease of the publication is not cutting it off. Imagine if you had a photo and in place of the dress was someone's face. If we move it off to the side here and have it centered, it's not going to look quite right if we have the features of someone's face, or even in this case, the dress, being cut off in the middle of the spread. So make sure that when you're choosing placement that you don't cut off any key features and that anything that's in the middle are things that are more filler or background to the image. Now let's talk about technique number 3, which is placing an image as a background. I'm going to go ahead and copy this frame, edit, copy, and then I'm going to double click on a master in my Pages panel. However, I'm going to do something else with this particular master page, so I want to create a new one first. I'm going to go to the More Options arrow drop-down menu and choose New Master. I am going to name this B, and then I'll just know that B indicates my background image spread. Now what I'm going to do is choose Edit, Paste. And now I have my image back, except this time, because it's on a master page, it's going to appear on every single page in my publication. So make sure that you're careful about that distinction and placement. One important thing to note is if you apply a background image or any other type of background treatment on a master page and do not see it showing up on all of the pages, what you'll want to do is right-click in the master area in the Pages panel up here, and you'll see this menu appear. Go down to Apply Master to Pages. Here you can choose the specific master page that you want to work with from the Apply Master drop-down menu. You can also choose which pages you want to apply it to. For example, you can be specific like 1 to 2, 7, 10, or let's say in our case, we just want to choose all pages from the drop-down menu and then click OK. Then you'll notice that if you scroll down, it's on every single page. Another thing you can do is right-click in the master page area of the Pages panel and choose Master Options. This will allow you to change the way that a master page is labeled, the number of pages that the master should be, and any other relevant details that you would like to change. You may decide that you don't want it to be so bold for the background of every page. In this case, what you might want to do is change the opacity. To do this, go up to Window and then Effects to bring up the Effects panel. In this case, we can change the opacity in this upper right corner here. I can click on the arrow here and then use the slider to reduce the opacity. Now notice how it's getting lighter as we move down. You can choose whatever opacity level you want. Just make sure that it's what you want to commit to. Now let's look at technique 5, which is adding color behind an opaque background image. In order to look at this, I'm going to move my current image off of the page. So I'm just going to click, hold, and drag so that it's being held on the pasteboard off to the left here, or to the right. Then I am going to choose the rectangle tool and click, hold, and drag a rectangle that covers the entire spread. Next, I'm going to go up to the fill box in the options panel with the rectangle tool still selected. I want to choose maybe a goldish color to kind of bring out the accents in that image. And so I'm just going to choose, let's go with this color. So the code here is FFEE9F, and then click OK. Now, what I'm going to do is go back to my selection tool and click, hold, and drag my image back onto the page. You'll notice that my image is hiding now. So I need to either send my solid color rectangle to the back or bring my dress image to the front. Right-click on the page, choose Arrange, and then in this case, I want to choose Bring to Front. Notice now that because I've changed the opacity of the image, that yellow background is shining through and giving it the golden feel that I was trying to achieve. I may then decide that I want to go back into the effects panel and change my opacity further because I've added this background color. So I can reduce it further so that it's a little more subtle. Now let's discuss technique number 6, which is using layers to organize information. This is very similar to other Adobe programs in that you can work with layers. Go up to Window and then Layers. With your Layers panel open, notice that I've created a layer for the highlight and shadow effect. This is really important because it's something that we may want to turn on and off. To do this, I just need to click the eye and it goes away. There's going to be times when you don't want to send your work with this effect on it. So this is a really great way to be able to turn it off easily and then replace it if you need to. When it comes to setting up layers in InDesign, there's a set of rules that are important to adhere to. You want the highlight and shadow to be at the top of the list, then page numbers, then text, and then images. Remember that every new layer sits on top of the previous layer. That's why it's important to have the highlight and shadow effect as the top layer for all of the pages, because you want this to overlay on top of all of the other content that you've created. It's generally best to keep the text and images towards the bottom. The first thing we need to do is gather the images that we want to place. Make sure that they're all saved in the same place so that you can gather them up efficiently at one time. I am going to go to File and then Place. And I'm going to choose a selection of images of the cast of Friends. So for me, in this specific folder, I'm just going to click on the first image, hold down Shift, and then click on the last image. And then it will open all of them at the same time. Notice now that my loaded cursor has one thumbnail image showing, but it says 6 in parentheses. This means that I have 6 images that I will place. So let's get started with creating our grid. What we're going to do is choose where we want to begin, click, hold, drag, and form our initial frame. Now I'm holding down my mouse and clicking at the same time. But before I let go, I need to create the confines of my grid. I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to create this. I'm going to use the right arrow key, so pressing once, to add 2 columns to my grid. I'm going to press the right arrow key again to add 3. Now I need to create 2 distinct rows. So I'm going to press the up arrow on my keyboard once, and now I have 6 distinct areas for images. Now I'm going to let go of my mouse. All 6 images have been placed in my grid. I now need to determine how they're going to fit within each frame. One of the things that I can do is go up to the Options toolbar with the Selection tool active and choose Fill Frame Proportionally. Notice that this is going to stretch some of my images out, so that's one such option. I'm going to back out of this. You can also choose Autofill or Autofit. There's also Fitting Content Proportionally. Then you can also explore options just to the right of that with Fitting Content to the Frame, Fitting the Frame to the Content, and Centering the Content. I think that I want to fit my frames to the content to maintain these sizes. So now that has changed. One thing you can do, and I'm going to back up to show you this, is use a tool that we haven't yet used, and that's the gap tool. It's this one right below on my screen, the direct selection arrow, and it's got a double-edged horizontal arrow with 2 little lines on either side, indicating that the arrows are showing a gap. With this tool active, I can then go between them, click, hold, and drag, and then change the different proportions and sizes of my photos in the grid. Let's say that I like this placement. Then maybe I want to change this size. The same can also be done with the top and bottom area. I can move them up. I can also move them down. I can also do this on the margin area. So I can click, hold, and drag around the edges to drag them off the page if I choose, or further inward from the margin. You can also work with individual frames within the grid. So this allows you to do things like, if I click this little yellow box, I can use these little diamonds that appear to create rounded images for my grid. If I do this again and press this little yellow box and hold down the Shift key, it only adjusts this one corner. And if I let go, now only one corner of my object frame is rounded. So you can play around with that and see what you like best. Now let's discuss technique number 8, which is adding frames to images. Let's say that I want to add a frame to this upper right image in the corner. I'm going to select it, and then to add the frame, I'm just going to simply add a stroke in the options bar. Here's the stroke box, and I'm going to choose a white stroke, and then I'm going to increase the stroke, let's say to 4. Now notice that the box has a stroke around it. Now let's say I want to add some other effects to my box. I'm going to go to the little FX symbol here at the top, and I think I might want to add a drop shadow. I've got my drop shadow. Now let's say I want to add an inner glow. So I've got these settings in place. And if I want to apply them to every other shape in my photo grid, what I need to do is move on to technique number 9, which is creating object styles. This is something that will greatly reduce the amount of work that you need to do when applying certain styles to objects. Let's say that we want to add a frame to any image, particularly in this set that we've created with the photo grid. What I'll want to do is specify what I want. So let's say I want to add some type of blue stroke around the image, and I want it to be size 7. I think that I want to apply this to every single image in my grid to keep it uniform. What I'm going to do is select the frame that I've applied this to, then go up to Window, Styles, Object Styles. You're going to see this Object Styles menu pop up. Then we're going to go down to the bottom edge to the Create New Style icon, the little piece of paper with the corner turned up. Press that icon, and you're going to see something new appear called Object Style 1. Let's double click on this and rename it. I'm going to name it something specific so I remember what it is. Blue frame, 7 stroke, and then you can add anything else that you might like onto that. Then click OK. You'll see that this object style has now been added to my list. When I go and click on any other object frame in my grid and just simply click on that new style in the panel, it will automatically apply. When I go and click on another image and then click on this new style, it will automatically apply, or I can click on any other frame or object style that I've selected and apply it just with one click. If you find that you're having trouble with a specific frame style, in this case, my blue frame is not applying in the way that I want it to, and now I've recreated that frame as an object style so that it now applies correctly. If you ever need to redo a frame, just simply recreate it, and then you can delete the one that you don't want out of the list. Let's move on to technique number 10, which is placing one image in several separate frames. This is a technique that will just add a little bit of visual interest depending upon the images or text that you're working with. You don't want to make too much use of this technique, but it's one that's good to know that can elevate your work. To begin, we need to choose an image to work with. Go up to File, Place, and then select the image wherever you have it saved. I have my loaded cursor, and I'm going to click, hold, and drag to create a text frame to place it in. When I'm happy with that setting, let go. To deselect the image, click outside of the box. The next step is to choose the rectangle frame tool on the left side of the screen. Remember that if you click and hold on this tool, there's other shapes of frames you can work with, but I'm going to stick with the rectangle frame for now. The point of this technique is to isolate certain parts of the image so that it will appear as one image, but actually be contained in separate frames. So I'm going to show you what I mean. It's best to begin by choosing one focal point. In this case, this really dramatic Dracula costume is going to be my focal point. So I'm going to draw a frame around it. Then maybe I want to include this Moulin Rouge sign. And you can also overlap them to have a connected image effect. So I'm going to work with this yellow dress and highlight this one here. Then maybe this dress hanging from the ceiling. These white costumes down in the corner here, and a little bit of backdrop to add some connection to the background area. As soon as I have my frames in place, I'm going to click outside in the page to deselect with my selection tool active. The next thing that we need to do is get rid of the image we initially placed. To do this, click on the image with the selection tool active, and then go up to Edit, Cut. The image has temporarily gone away, and what we're left with is the frames that we drew. Now don't worry, we're going to bring it back, and through our InDesign magic, it's only going to appear in those isolated areas where we've drawn frames. So let's get started with that. With the selection tool active, click on any one of your frames. Then go up to Edit, Paste Into. And notice that the image is back, but only the part that I had defined with the frame. Now let's do this for the rest of the frames. Select the frame, Edit, Paste Into. Select the frame, Edit, Paste Into. Select, Edit, Paste Into. Select, Edit, Paste Into. Select, Edit, Paste Into. Now notice that I have this fragmented effect of a collage, but it's all coming from one central place. This is especially clear in areas where the image still lines up with overlap, such as where this yellow dress is and these hanging clothes on the left side here. If you want to play with this further, you can add frames. So I can select a frame, and then in my object styles, apply any style I want. You can also select a frame and then hover your cursor outside the corner so you see this curved double arrow and click, hold, and drag to rotate it. I can do this for any of my images, and depending upon the effect you want to achieve, you're going to make different decisions. This will also vary based on the content of the photo that you're working with. This can be a great way to create an abstract effect. We've come to the last technique that we're going to discuss for this video, and that is exporting your file so that the spreads remain intact. This is particularly important when you create spreads that include an entire image covering the whole spread, such as what we've talked about earlier in this video. To do this, you're going to follow similar commands to what you're used to for exporting. Go up to File, and then Adobe PDF Presets. Then choose High Quality Print. You're going to save the file as whatever you want to title it. So I'm just going to leave mine titled as Untitled 2 for now. And then click Save. When this comes up, you're going to have a screen that gives you many different options for the way that you want to export your PDF. A lot of the things that we have been working with are defaults that will remain in place. However, there's lots of different things you can play with here. There's different menus on the side that include general options, compression, marks and bleeds, output, advanced, security, and summary. For our purposes, we're looking primarily at general. In order to make sure that your spreads stay intact, we want to pay attention to this area here titled Pages. Notice how there's an area where you can indicate pages or spreads. By default, InDesign will export pages, but you want to make sure that you export spreads. So click that circle so that your spreads remain intact and gives optimal viewing for your publication. Also remember that it's a good idea to keep the box View PDF after exporting checked so that it will come up for your review after you have exported it and saved it. There are other guidelines for how you'll export a PDF if it's going to be displayed digitally, so make sure that you review that either by looking for relevant articles on the Adobe support site or looking up YouTube videos to ensure that you're doing this to the proper specifications. I now have an exported PDF with the specifications that I set. So in this tutorial, we've covered 10 different techniques that you can use to elevate your work. And we've added at the end how to export so that you keep your spreads intact. So go forth, work well in InDesign,